This case will always be with me. I will always remember it.
Nancy Blackburn and her husband Ian were found in the trunk of their car Monday night.
Nancy had ligature marks consistent with strangulation.
God, he hog-tied her while she was still alive.
There's no doubt somebody was being extremely cruel for whatever reason.
We did have a series of break-ins over the winter. Some guy staying in vacant summer homes.
You ever ID the guy?
Nope. We just call him the house hermit.
As soon as I walked in the door, I hear, "Don't move or I'll shoot."
Listen, you think you could describe this guy to a sketch artist?
Absolutely.
At this point, we believe the house hermit is the one responsible for the Blackburns' murder. But we had no clue who he was.
If you think you see him, do not approach him. Clear. Call 911. He is armed and extremely dangerous.
We had to find this person. It was, I think, midnight or a little bit later than midnight that I got the call. It was in the Forest Hill area in the north end of the city of Toronto. It's not normally where you expect to find any violent occurrence. It was unusual.
What do we got? 2 victims. Ian and Nancy Blackburn, reported missing from Caledon OPP earlier today. A cottage up there.
Where are the bodies?
In the trunk of Nancy's car.
The bodies looked like they'd been in there for a while. The man was fully clothed and the woman naked. The woman obviously had ligature marks around her wrists, her legs, her ankles. There's no doubt somebody was being extremely cruel for whatever reason to Nancy.
Yeah. Thanks.
In the car, there was a tissue, and the tissue appeared to have blood on it. And we weren't sure whose blood it was.
Call a forensics truck. Tell them to take the car with the body still inside. Nobody touches the thing in there. You already checked the house?
Yeah, just mail and newspapers from a couple days ago.
That's probably when the crime happened.
I mean, the house is pretty clean otherwise. Nothing seems to be missing.
Any signs of violence?
No, but the forensics team hasn't gone through yet. So.
We found the bodies.
Jamie Osborne, the nephew. He's pretty shocked.
Yeah. Thanks. Jamie? Detective Doug Grady. I understand you're the one that found them.
Yeah.
How long have they been missing?
I don't know. My dad asked me to check up on them, but when I got here, I noticed the cat didn't have any food and water, and I thought that was weird. So I checked the car and popped the trunk.
What made you pop the trunk?
My dad asked me to, when I couldn't find them.
It seems like an unusual request. You know, check the trunk for your aunt and uncle.
Why would anyone do this? They're good people.
I don't know, Jamie. But we're gonna figure it out.
Nancy Blackburn and her husband Ian were found in the trunk of their car Monday night. The car was parked outside their North Toronto home. A relative made the grim discovery. The Blackburns had not been seen in 6 days.
They appeared to be nice people. Everybody seemed to like them. Ian had a real estate business. Nancy, on the other hand, was a public health nurse working for the city of Toronto. They had no children. They lived in a nice neighborhood. They were your average, normal Toronto downtown people. We'd like to know the last time they were alive. That would help us to know the time of death.
Police can't say where Mrs. Blackburn was murdered or when. The Blackburns owned another home in Caledon. A second family car was found in the driveway there. Police now say they don't know where the couple died. Was it in Toronto, where Nancy was last seen alive? Or in Caledon, where Ian went to repair the plumbing in their historic country home?
Caledon is a rural area north of Toronto. It was becoming an up and developing area where huge homes were being built. Ian and Nancy's farmhouse would be treated as a cottage retreat type of place. It was a large property. It was quiet. It was a nice place.
Ian never parked there, you know. For 25 years, he parked over there.
You are?
Orville Osborne. I'm married to Ian's sister. We share the property with him.
Osborne. Your son found the victims. Jamie?
That's right. Poor thing.
Listen, if you don't mind my asking you, why'd you have him pop the trunk?
Honestly, I don't know. We were desperate to find them. We hadn't heard from them all week. Then when I saw Ian's car parked there, that's when I knew something was wrong. But I never would have imagined.
Sorry for your loss.
You know, Ian's father passed this whole area down to us after he died. It's a special place. See that round barn over there? That was built in 1890. There's only 3 of them left in the whole province. You know why they built them that way?
Why?
So the devil couldn't back you into a corner.
Detective Grady?
Excuse me.
Was there any animus between the Blackburns and Orville over the land of that huge property up in Caledon? It was a possibility. Maybe there was a motive there.
Hey.
Jim Hutchinson.
Nice to meet you, Jim.
Call me Hutch.
The OPP forensic team were going through that house piece by piece. The officers basically on their hands and knees looking at everything.
And that's when we found this. We tested it. It matches Nancy's blood.
Boom. That was our crime scene.
The tissue with the blood on it found in the front seat came back. It's not our victims, so it could be the killer. Nancy had ligature marks consistent with strangulation, but not Ian. He died from a different form of asphyxia. They think he had a bag over his head.
How about sexual assault?
No evidence of it.
God, he hog-tied her while she was still alive.
Her arms were tied behind her back and her ankles were tied to the wrists. The severe wounds to her were such that she must have been in a lot of pain at that particular point. The person that did it was just throwing her around like a suitcase. So now you basically go back and try and figure out where your victims were, what they were doing at the last point that they were alive that you know of.
All right.
Ian, last seen. Leaving work Tuesday night, 5 p.m. He's going to Caledon to check on the cottage. Okay, this is Nancy's last activity. She calls a friend from the Toronto home at 7 p.m. that night. She's looking for Ian. Check this out. Phone records. Approximately 1 hour later, 7:56, 5-minute phone call from the cottage to the Toronto home. But after that, we got nothing. So, what was said during that phone call?
The interesting thing is that the phone call occurred and Nancy drove up there. We don't know if it was a request from Ian for her to come up or from the suspect. Why did that person have to have Nancy come to the cottage?
Okay. Is there a lot of crime in Caledon? Murders, missing persons?
Not usually, but 2 guns were stolen from Blackburn's neighbor in Caledon. And Caroline Case, she's a Toronto woman. She went missing after she left her shop 6 months ago.
What happened to her?
47-year-old Caroline Case, who was last seen at her import store on Bloor Street West in Etobicoke. About 12 hours after she was reported missing, her wrecked Mercedes-Benz station wagon was found in a ditch near Caledon, north of Metro.
We searched the area for days. She's still missing.
We had these two cases. The Blackburns, who were taken from Caledon, bodies are found in Toronto. And then we had Carolyn Case, abducted from Toronto and taken to Caledon. That was something we had to investigate further.
Anything else?
We did have a series of break-ins over the winter. Some guy staying in vacant summer homes.
You ever ID the guy?
Nope. We just call him the house hermit.
This person who was doing these break-and-enters, it seemed to be unusual, but it didn't seem to be violent.
We're gonna dig into that.
Okay. I'm gonna focus on closing out the family.
So now we have to start answering the simple questions, like who would have a motive, opportunity, or means to do this? What you do in most investigations, you start close to the family. There's something different about funerals where somebody's murdered. People will sometimes look around and wonder, is it you? Is it you? Because nobody knows. And I attended the Blackburns' funeral to see the reaction of people. Some people may feign remorse.
Thank you for coming, Detective.
Of course, my condolences.
My son can't shake the image of their bodies in the trunk. And my wife is devastated. Ian was her brother. I don't know how to comfort them.
I've seen cases where it's put on and it's quite obvious. In this case, I didn't have that because they're all decent people who unfortunately found themselves in an awful, awful situation. At the same time, the officers who investigated all of these break-and-enters, they spoke to everybody who reported a break-in that we thought was related to the house hermit. We found that there was a similar incident, not in Caledon, but in a place called Tiny Township, north of Caledon. And Sam Appleton had a cottage there.
We were just stopping by to see how this place weathered the winter. My wife Rose stayed in the car. As soon as I walked in the door, I noticed the TV cable was running up the stairs into the bedroom. The door was closed. It was very warm in there, and the smell was horrible. Then from behind me, I hear, "Don't move or I'll shoot." And I see a gun. And then the man said, "Don't look at me."
Can you describe the gun?
I don't know, a handgun. Then he had me come back down the stairs and come lie down on the floor, right there. Then he tells me he's coming back to Toronto with me. He says he's committed a bad fraud and he doesn't want to go to jail. So we get in the car, me in front driving with Rose, him in the back.
You didn't want to drive?
No, he insisted I drive. I acted like nothing was wrong. I told Rose that the guy was just getting a ride back to Toronto, but she quickly realized what was going on. We come to a busy intersection. I said, "Either you shoot me here or get out now." Must have scared him because he just took our money and ran off.
Sam Appleton was a pretty gutsy individual, but his story helped me understand what may have happened to the Blackburns.
Listen, you think you could describe this guy to a sketch artist?
Absolutely.
We now know the house hermit was definitely armed. He's brazen. Is he a person who's now going to escalate his criminal behavior? We had to find this person. I finally get a call from the duty desk. An officer had found weird garbage out by the Blackburn farmhouse.
You having a picnic?
No, but the house hermit was. I wouldn't touch that.
Why, what's in them?
Feces.
Oh, God.
These bottles are filled with urine.
urine in a bottle, fecal matter wrapped up. It was totally unusual.
Take a look at these. These are the handwritten lists he leaves behind everywhere else.
It's military equipment. It's pretty obscure stuff.
Warplanes, tanks, cannons, firearms. It was like somebody was playing some type of war game against themselves. It was getting warm, so people were going to be around their cottages. We were quite concerned about finding him before he could do something else. We now had at least a sketch of what the house hermit may look like. This person is out there somewhere, and we can't identify who he is. From the Appleton incident, we had fingerprints that were directly related to the house hermit. We ran the prints through our national fingerprint database, and there is no result attributing it to anybody we know. How could his fingerprints not be on the national databank? This is somebody who's been exhibiting quite severe criminal behavior. At this point, we believe the house hermit is the one responsible for the Blackburns' murder, but we had no clue who he was.
We got to go public with this.
Tell them what?
Everything. Everything about the house hermit, the break-ins, the sketch, even the strange military lists. I mean, somebody's got to recognize those, right? We got to stop this guy. Now, we believe the man who killed the Blackburns is also responsible for a series of cottage break-ins in the Caledon area. He's known to camp out in these cottages for several days at a time, so we call him the house hermit. Now, he always leaves behind these handwritten military lists like a calling card. So for this reason, we think he's a military buff. Now, if you think you see him, or if you think you know him, do not approach him. Call 911. He is armed and extremely dangerous.
Usually when you have a press conference, in a major homicide case, you can get 200 calls. In this particular case, we got one call. There was a woman in Orangeville, 30 minutes north of Toronto, who had some information.
Allison Shaw? Detective Doug Grady, Metro Police. Now, you said on the phone that you know who the wanted man is in the Blackburn murders.
Yeah, it's David Snow. David ran a side business with my husband, Darius, and last fall he disappeared and left us saddled with debt. And so to recoup our debt, we cleared out his stuff. And that's when I saw the writings. There were military entries in a journal. Hundreds of them. And the handwriting is exactly the same as what's in the paper.
You said that he disappeared last fall. Do you remember when exactly?
Sometime early October. No one around here has seen or heard from him since.
Do you think David Snow would be capable of something like this?
Oh, he is a creep. Anything is possible with that guy.
Okay, thanks very much.
David Snow was a friend of the family. Allison did not like him one bit. With her husband, Darius thought he was a good guy, just a little odd. We wanted to speak to Darius Shaw as soon as we could.
I don't see it, no. David was a weird guy, but he wasn't no killer.
It's not what your wife thinks.
Yeah, well, we see him differently. She tell you he used to babysit our kids? My daughter calls him Uncle David. He's just a regular small-town guy. He's a bit odd, sure, misunderstood, but he's not violent.
So the two of you were close?
Yeah, we had a business together, taking apart old frame structures, putting them back together. Money was good, too, until David took off, stuck me with $2,600 in debt.
Do you know where I might find David now?
He's probably hiding out somewhere around here. I haven't seen him in months, but he can't be far.
Why's that?
He just walks everywhere. There's a pathological fear of driving. Like I said, odd.
Once we identified David Snow, we started talking to people in Orangeville. A lot of the men said David was just a little off. Most of the women we talked to said he was creepy, said there was something about him. We didn't like being around him. He didn't do anything aggressive, as they would say, but they just felt uncomfortable around him. We got that intuition from a lot of different women.
He does have a record. Orangeville charged him with fraud last summer for writing bad checks.
Well, that's what Appleton said, but we ran the prints and nothing came back.
They made a mistake. They thought they needed a conviction before they uploaded them. Regardless, the prints match.
David Snow is the house room.
Yeah. Now all we need to do is find him.
We needed to talk to David Snow's mother. I'm hoping she's going to give us assistance in locating him. His mother lived in a nice neighborhood in the West End of Toronto.
Caroline Case.
She ran the Jeweled Elephant on Bloor, right?
47-year-old Carolyn Case was last seen at her import store on Bloor Street West in Etobicoke.
Caroline Case. She's a Toronto woman. She went missing after she left her shop 6 months ago.
Hi, Doug Grady. Listen, I am staring at the Jeweled Elephant, and you will never guess who lives right nearby it. David Snow's mother.
I've met many mothers of victims and of accused, but I've never met a mother who said what she said.
I'm terrified of him.
I'm so sorry, Mrs. Snow. Do you still see him?
Not really. The last time I saw him was last fall, just after his antiques business had fallen apart. I was so scared. Before he came, I hid all the sharp knives.
Did David ever physically harm you?
Yes. That was the reason that I had to leave the house in Orangeville, the house where he still lives.
She was afraid of her own son. She kept that house so that he'd live in it and he wouldn't come live with her.
He grew up in that house, the whole family did. And one by one, we all left.
Everybody in the family was tiptoeing around David. You know, that leave him alone, just let him do what he's doing.
Police! Coming in!
When I left the house, it was because of the abuse. It was a nightmare.
She had hope that he didn't kill those people, but she didn't doubt for a second that he did. David's mother confirmed that he attended her place in early October, the date just before Carolyn Case went missing.
Hello? Snow?
Let's get you. Yeah.
Clear. Clear. Clear.
We go in this house, and it looks like somebody hasn't lived there for quite some time.
Here, hold this.
we found a hidden room.
You should get in here.
There's various pictures from catalogs, cutouts of women, but not quite pornography. It was a bit odd. And it told us a little bit about this person's psychological side. There's all kinds of military books with military equipment, ships, tanks, planes, all over the house. We don't know where he is or what he's going to do next.
He's definitely on the run.
So we put out a Canada-wide warrant for his arrest.
Police say David Snow does not drive. They believe he is in hiding in the Caledon area. He is armed and dangerous.
As predators escalate, they become more dangerous, and he was escalating. So where would he go from there?
Police are looking for anyone who may have seen Christina Robertson last Friday. And they're never gonna find you.
Just got another report on the house hermit from Caledon. The owners just got back from a winter in Venezuela.
This doesn't help. None of this helps. Just confirms what we already know. We need to know where he is now. I mean, he may still be in Ontario. He could also be anywhere in the country. All right. Let's send out everything we have on Snow. Fingerprints, the military writings, the serial numbers of every gun he's stolen. I mean, he's not just sitting around hiding. We need every police agency in the country to know everything that could possibly identify him, because he's going to do this again. And when he does, we need to know about it.
All right. I'm on it.
The whole time we're looking for him in the Greater Toronto area, unbeknownst to us, we find that he was out in British Columbia the entire time.
What's happening?
Wait here.
8 days ago, she closed up for work at 6 o'clock at this East Vancouver photography studio and disappeared.
This is a classic, unexplainable missing persons case. There appears to be no reasonable explanation as to why this young lady's gone missing.
Found her at a video store. You like?
During that time, a video store clerk goes missing, and the RCMP find the car in Mount Seymour Park.
Got a Beetle in Mount Seymour Park. License plate matches the missing one.
In the car, they found a firearm that was stolen from Caledon. That's how we knew it was David Snow who had that car and was in that area.
Where?
Over there.
Are you okay?
The women are rescued, and Snow takes off further into that Mount Seymour forest. And so RCMP North Vancouver conducted the largest manhunt they've ever done.
They're searching the forest and its maze of trails for one suspect.
They brought in as many officers as they could because this guy was now out in an area that is heavily traveled by a lot of people.
All vehicles leaving the park are being searched. All entrances into the area are closed.
So at the same time, I get the first plane that's flying out west and go to Vancouver.
He never untied you.
Once, when he kidnapped the other woman, he walked me to the car and he told me to wait for him. I was alone and untied, and I could have walked away.
Why didn't you?
I didn't know where he was. I didn't want to get shot. I was terrified. I remember thinking to myself, this is the end. He's gonna kill me.
I'm so sorry I have to ask this. Is this the guy?
That's him, yeah. He felt like a very sick kid. And I was his toy. I was just something for him to play with. He had no conscience.
He held her captive and tied up for 8 days. I was amazed by how she had gotten through this and survived it. She was a strong young woman.
It's believed the suspect had been camping out in this dense parkland. Police believe he's still here, trapped within countless roadblocks.
RCMP conduct a search throughout this particular park, and all night long it's going on. They have helicopters. These are huge parks with lots of forest areas within David Snow's comfort zone. And so he got to the Suspension Bridge restaurant, which is in the Capilano Park, and saw that there was somebody closing up the restaurant. So he took her to the back, not knowing the police were in the area. And the officer hears movement behind the building.
Police!
David Snow was caught in the act, sexually assaulting and attempting to murder a woman. An ambulance came, took her to the hospital right away, and she survived this incident.
A dramatic story unfolding in British Columbia tonight, revolving around this man, David Snow. Police arrested him yesterday after a manhunt that chased him out of the mountains around North Vancouver. They accused him of kidnapping 2 women and trying to kill a third.
You're not happy to see him. It's not a job satisfaction, like, okay, now we've got you, because you're still working on your case all the way through.
I already spoken to my lawyer. I have nothing to say to you.
When you're sitting across from a murderer and you're asking questions, there's only one person in that room that knows everything, and it's not you. So we thought, okay, let's throw everything out. Let's just see what sticks.
Okay, but there's just one thing I want to know, okay? What did you have Ian say to Nancy on the phone that night to convince her to come up to the cottage? All right, well, that's fine, David, because we know about everything else you did. You made it quite easy for us, actually. We know that you killed Ian and Nancy Blackburn.
We had DNA on the tissue matching up with David Snow's DNA. It was a perfect match. That was basically the nail in his coffin, so to speak.
Caroline Case. We know that you spotted her after visiting your mom one day. We know that you took her from her store. We know you made her drive you home.
I'm gonna tell you everything, but I need a guarantee.
What guarantee?
I don't get a day. Over 25 years.
I didn't want to make a deal with a killer and allow him a sentence that I felt was unfair for what he did, and that is life in jail, opportunity for parole after 25 years, but not an outright deal where it's 25 and done.
We're gonna put you away for a long, long time, David.
We felt so adamant that we wanted to find Caroline Case and that David Snow was responsible for her murder. There is no doubt in our mind.
He is a reasonable suspect in the Caroline Case matter.
We asked the OPP to do another search in that field where the car had been overturned.
Today, a convoy of cars carrying up to 100 officers moved into the area to conduct a blade-by-blade search of the grass. Police found the remains to missing businesswoman Caroline Case.
There was an autopsy, but there wasn't enough evidence to relate back to David Snow. I'm convinced that David Snow killed Caroline Case. But me being convinced is not enough.
The fate of the man nicknamed the House Hermit is now in the jury's hands.
What we could do is only convict him for what we actually had. And we had him for the Blackburns, and so that's the ones we charged him with, and that's the ones we could prove.
The Crown says the most important piece of evidence is a bloody tissue found in Nancy Blackburn's car. The stained tissue contains Snow's DNA.
The only way we can properly speak for Ian and Nancy Blackburn is to have a conviction in the end.
As the verdict was read out, Snow had no reaction, simply staring downwards, never looking at the jury. Life in prison with no chance of parole.
We got a conviction for Ian and Nancy. We couldn't do it for some other victims.
Asked by the judge if he had any words, Snow mumbled, "I've got nothing to say."
I don't think he feels bad about anything he's done. He's a psychopath, and I think feeling guilty is something he's not capable of.
I've had the occasion to actually be quite close to him and stare him right in the eye, and it's just a blank stare. It just doesn't seem to be anything there.
Ian Blackburn's sister says justice has been served.
A long 6 months waiting for this to come, and so thrilled that we finally have a verdict we all wanted.
That it's done. We're finished with this guy. He's now going to a place that is better than what he deserves, but it's finished.
It looked as if the body had been dropped from the sky.
I could hear my mum screaming, and by then I just knew.
It just wasn't right, so it fills you with a cold dread.
So here we are coming to the stage where the serial killer effect kicked in.
Early in the morning of the 28th of August 1981, a commuter discovered the mutilated body of a young girl dumped by the Thames in Windsor. Unable to pinpoint exactly where she'd been killed meant that finding the killer was like looking for a needle in a haystack. All the police knew for certain was that they were looking for a violent and sadistic individual who took pleasure in inflicting pain, and that he was likely to do it again. Built on the banks of the River Thames in Berkshire is the town of Windsor. It's home to Windsor Castle, which has been an official residence of the British royal family for almost 1,000 years.
Windsor is a very, very busy town, very busy tourist town. However, the village of Windsor, the residence area of Windsor, is very local, just like any other village, and everybody knows everybody, and everybody knows everybody else's business.
On a bright, sunny Friday morning in August 1981, Kenneth Linney of Thames Valley Police received a phone call, starting a case that would become a 30-year personal crusade.
I was at home and I received a call about 6:30 in the morning to say that a body had been found on the banks of the Thames in Windsor. I immediately attended.
When Detective Superintendent Linney reached the scene at 6:45, he was met by a horrific sight.
I arrived at Barry Avenue, where the body was in a face-down position, naked, that of a teenage girl, and it transpired that it was found by a man on his way to work. He immediately notified the police. I then made various phone calls and got other officers out to form an inquiry team and the uniformed officers to seal the area off, and from there it went on into a general investigation.
There's no attempt to conceal the body, in fact, far from it. And one can only speculate as to the significance of this, but it could be that leaving the body in that condition to full public view might have been an additional twist to the humiliation of the victim.
Houseboats moored just meters from the body were immediately investigated.
All those boats were stopped from moving, and officers then started interviewing the occupants to see if they'd heard anything during the night.
By 7 a.m. they had ascertained that no one had heard anything, and Detective Superintendent Linney continued organising the investigation.
I notified then the Home Office pathologist. I then formulated a small incident room at Windsor Police Station until we had identified the body. It was very important to find out who this girl was. No girl had been reported missing in the Windsor area.
Almost 13 miles away near Hanwell in West London, mother of 3 Carol Walterton made a worrying discovery about her 17-year-old daughter Claire.
Went to wake her up and she wasn't in her bed, and it just wasn't right, so it fills you with a cold dread.
A worried Carol went to work, whilst in Windsor the police investigation continued.
It looked as if the body had been dropped from the sky due to the fact there was no blood or anything outside the basic body area. And bear in mind that there were severe wounds to the body. This was a problem for us. But we could find no forensic evidence as to where it was dropped from.
The forensic team then went about doing a procedure called taping.
Taping is done with sellotape to take any particles off the body. It's laid out then and sealed and used later on then for forensic report purposes.
In the early 80s, forensic scientists could only compare and match fibre samples. So until they found a comparison, the tapings were sent to storage. Then a preliminary investigation was carried out by the pathologist at the scene.
The wounds that were on the body could have been done in situ, where the body was found. But the body was definitely unconscious, if not lifeless, when it was laid on the footpath.
The pathologist found that Claire's throat had been cut and she'd been sadistically mutilated. It was too much, even for the most experienced of officers.
The injuries caused to the girl, horrific injuries that were caused to her, and how she must have suffered. And I think it affects you. I had four daughters, and I could see my teenage daughters in the same situation. So it does affect you.
It wasn't long before this horrendous and baffling murder made the national news.
I went to work and heard on the radio that they'd found somebody, her body, and I just knew it was her. I just knew it was her from where they found her in Windsor, which wasn't far from us. I don't know why, I just knew it was her, so I went into a complete panic. I phoned all the friends that I knew to see whether she was there. I phoned her work, and they were very cross that she just hadn't turned up. So I got home and went straight to the police station.
Once Claire had been reported missing, police quickly made the potential link.
The Metropolitan Police rang to say that a girl was missing from the Hanwell area. So we've notified them again, and officers came down and they identified the body.
Certain they had the right person, it was time for the police to tell the family and confirm Carol's worst fears.
Yes, it was her. After they looked at photos and things. And I can't even begin to describe what it was like after that.
Claire's older brother Nick arrived home, hoping his sister was still just missing.
After I heard it on the radio and everything else, and I made my way home, and as I was walking down the pavement, I could hear my mum screaming indoors. I could hear her screaming, and by then I just knew as well. And I think it was the police or someone that answered the door, and I think I just turned and said, "Is it?" or something, and they said, "Yeah."
Thames Valley police officers wasted no time looking into Claire's background.
I went up with another officer to Yedding Lane, to the family home, and there spoke to Mr. and Mrs. Bevel. They, of course, were in a terrible state, and I then again got officers to sit with them and left them to mourn their fate. It was a terrible shock, because the girl was used to going out during the day, and she was a local girl, and was well liked by everybody in the district.
On a council estate, there wasn't too much to do, but you have lots of friends, so she was always with friends, and, well, we always had a house full of friends. I think that was more her enjoyment. And also when she got her job, that became the be-all and end-all of her life, because she loved it so much and obviously loved the people there as well.
The next morning, the sun may have risen as usual, but for Claire's mum, Carol, the world as she knew it had ended.
All I can really remember is the house being full of policemen. It was just basically showing photos, and so really then we were dealing with it the next day when we knew it really was her, and been dealing with it ever since.
Whilst the family began a lifetime of grieving, the police continued with their investigation, determined to find Claire's vicious killer.
It was decided that an incident room, a major incident room, should be set up in the Metropolitan Police District.
Pete Byrne was a young policeman at that time.
I was involved in an investigation in that I was a young detective and was part of the 50-strong team of detectives that worked on the investigation.
The police's first job was to build up a picture of Claire and her final movements on that fateful Thursday night.
Claire was ironing and we said, "Are you going out tonight?" And she said, "No."
Me and Claire was just sitting in the kitchen having a chat, which was unusual really. We was having a good old chat and everything, and she weren't going out that night. And that, you know, but the funny thing was, I remember, God, we must be growing up because of the way we was talking to each other. But I don't know, she was staying in and that was it.
But when we got home, she had gone out. She was 17, it wasn't a problem. But she was always in by 10 o'clock or abouts. But I thought 17, okay, it's 11 o'clock, you know. It's always the first time. But then when she didn't come home, couldn't sleep at all because it just wasn't like her. She'd never been away all night unless we'd known about it. But then I heard laughing outside and I thought, oh, she's home. So I went off to sleep.
It didn't take long for police to piece together Claire's last night.
On the Thursday evening, Claire had gone to see her boyfriend who ran an amusement arcade on the Uxbridge Road at Ealing. She had left there around about 10 p.m. Normally he would have given her a lift home, but they had a slight disagreement and she refused a lift. So she walked along the Uxbridge Road in the direction of her home in Northolt. Her boyfriend did attempt to get her into the car, stopped, asked her to get into the car, but she refused. That sighting of Claire being spoken to by her boyfriend is the last known sighting of Claire alive.
The boyfriend was immediately treated as a suspect.
He said he went home then by 10:30 that night, but he was arrested on suspicion of murder.
Even though the police had been left with no clues, could they have already managed to find the murderer? In August 1981, 17-year-old Claire Walterton had been horrifically murdered and dumped in Windsor, and so far, no forensic evidence had been found. Police had quickly pieced together Claire's final movements, identifying the last person she was seen with, who was arrested for murder and questioned.
Inquiries in relation to his whereabouts later on that evening revealed that he had gone home and was seen by a neighbour walking a dog shortly afterwards, so therefore he was ruled out as being the potential attacker of Claire.
With their only suspect now eliminated, the police looked at using the power of publicity.
There was a lot of media activity, television and all, up at Hanwell. And of course the papers then had the large columns on it.
Information about Claire's last night was released by police to the press.
Two ladies came forward following publicity and said that they'd seen a girl dragged into a car at the junction of Uxbridge and Yedding Lane about roughly around the time that Claire was last seen. They couldn't give any descriptions. All they could say was a dark-coloured car.
Keen to get the most from their only lead, police weren't afraid to try experimental techniques.
I resorted to hypnotists actually interviewing some of these people because we felt that if you can probably refresh someone's memory by that means, then, of course, we may come up with something that the person doesn't think of normally.
Hypnotism didn't seem to have the desired effect.
Whether that person that the lady saw was Claire is unknown. A large part of the initial investigation centred on trying to identify that vehicle, but it was never traced.
The ladies were so vague about this. They thought a girl was pulled into a car. There was no screams, nothing whatsoever. And it was some distance away they saw it. So there was no evidential value, really, in that particular incident.
Disappointed but undeterred, the investigation team continued with their inquiries.
The incident room then, once we established it at Norwood Green, became a very busy place because we had to do a lot of house-to-house inquiries from Hanwell down the Uxbridge Road right up to the top of Yedding Lane, which would have covered at the area where she would have walked. Then other inquiries had to be dealt with. You had inquiries, national inquiries, you had inquiries dealing with people with previous convictions for that type of offence or for sexual offences. So there was a lot of work to be done and a lot of foot slogging, to put it plainly.
For some on the team, this was all a new experience.
It was my first ever murder, and I was just learning how things are done on a major investigation in terms of the system. There was no computer as such, so everything was paper-based, but everything had to be done in a clear and methodical way so that nothing was missed.
There was a huge amount of work to be done.
The police inquiries, the witnesses, the incident room sometimes picks out something which is unusual from statements or movements or a person, the background of a person, and they have to be followed up, and they're known as actions. Actions are then dealt with by detective officers who are out on the ground. It takes a long time. The average working hours during the day in an inquiry like that can be anything from 12 to 14 hours a day. It's a lot of work.
After months of fruitlessly investigating every possible avenue, police were getting desperate.
Clairvoyants came forward. So many people came forward because it was a nasty murder. And the press gave it a lot of publicity.
With nothing to lose, a clairvoyant was introduced to Carol and the family.
She got in touch with them and they were clutching at straws. And she stayed for a couple of hours. But she kept saying things that Claire would have said, but Claire would never have spoken the way she was speaking, and she kept making out she was talking to her, which I found so upsetting, because if Claire was going to talk to anybody, she would have talked to me. Sorry. So, yeah, I had to ask her if she would go in the end, because she'd really overstayed her welcome.
In the spring of 1982, over 6 months after Claire Walterton's mutilated body was discovered in Windsor, the police still didn't have a single lead.
We tried everything, and as a result, of course, we didn't get anywhere. We had all our exhibits. They were put in storage in 1982. And then, as I say, I thought at that stage that we'll never solve the case unless, because of the sadistic injuries that were caused, were we dealing with a serial killer.
It was a horrible thought. Claire's killer probably wouldn't be caught unless they killed again.
This was someone who was really, really sadistic. And that was the type of person we were looking for.
The mutilation, the clearly sexual nature of the crime, suggests that there's a distinct possibility that the individual would strike again.
The failure to track down Claire's murderer was a big blow for everyone concerned.
You have to remember what things were like back in 1981. DNA as an investigative tool didn't exist. There was no CCTV. Mobile phones were very, very rare, and automatic number plate recognition didn't exist. However, you can only do what you can do, and if all the normal lines of inquiry haven't produced anything, then unfortunately you have to be pragmatic, and the investigation is wound down.
Well, it's disappointing that you like to get a result. You think of the girl lying on the pavement in Windsor, and it affects you. I don't care how hard anybody is, but it affects you. And it affected other officers at the time.
The chilling thought that Claire's killer would strike again never left the officers involved in the case. And in December 1984, Detective Superintendent Linney received the news he'd been expecting for over 2 years.
I had a phone call from officers over at Denham to say that they had found a body on the golf course. They told me that the body that they had was of a girl, naked and with horrific injuries. Now, I thought, well, this is identical. The modus operandi kicked in. The modus operandi is the method used by criminals, the same method that is used. And that is based on serial killers. So here we are coming to the stage where the serial killer effect kicked in.
Now investigating 2 similar killings, Thames Valley Police were forced to wonder, had Claire's murderer struck again? Just over 3 years after the unsolved murder of Claire Walterton in Windsor, a mutilated body of a woman called Deirdre Sainsbury was found dumped at a golf course in Denham. It was a discovery that grabbed the police's attention. The body found on the golf course had chilling similarities to the murder of Claire Walterton.
As soon as I heard of this incident and the fact that it was identical more or less to the girl that was found in Windsor, Claire Walterton's name, of course, was there, printed all over it.
A murder investigation was immediately launched.
The police publicised the fact of the murder, and by chance, a man had seen Deirdre get into a vehicle on the South Circular Road in Richmond. That man had only recently read an article in the Reader's Digest which talked about the dangers of hitchhikers, and he had the presence of mind to recall the index number or registration number of the car that this hitchhiker had got into.
It was a huge piece of luck.
Police from the Denham inquiry, having received the registered owner of the vehicle, went to the house of Colin Campbell, who was the registered owner. They searched his property and found in the garage the clothing from the girl found on the golf course at Denham.
Police arrested and interviewed 37-year-old travelling salesman and keen amateur hockey player Colin Campbell.
He admitted picking Deirdre up, stated that he chatted to her en route. In doing so, he gave his name, or his first name, and he felt, as he was getting on so well with her, he would try it on. He did. According to him, she retaliated and hit him, and then he hit her. But he stated he hit her so hard that she became unconscious. He stated he then panicked because he'd given his name to her, and in a panic, he then hit her about the head with a hockey stick, which is in the back of his car.
Campbell also admitted mutilating the body, allegedly to make it look like a maniac had done it. Convinced that there was a strong connection between Deirdre and Claire's killings, Detective Superintendent Linney went to see Campbell, hoping he might also confess to Claire's murder.
He was absolutely so suave, so complete, answered everything that I asked. Windsor? Oh yes, he'd been to Windsor. He'd been everywhere that I mentioned. But I had nothing whatsoever at that stage to connect him with Claire's murder. Nothing had been found at his property. And so I was left as I was in the beginning. And which was rather sad actually, because I thought that he might just break, but no.
It was disappointing, but the investigation into the brutal murder of Deirdre Sainsbury moved quickly.
Having been interviewed, admitted being responsible for Deirdre's death, he was charged with the murder and stood trial at Reading Crown Court. His plea in court was not guilty to murder. He stated that whilst responsible for Deirdre's death, he killed her whilst suffering an epileptic episode.
The jury chose not to believe an epileptic episode could explain this brutal and sexually motivated killing. In July 1985, just 6 months after her death, Campbell was convicted of Deirdre Sainsbury's murder and sentenced to life imprisonment. But Detective Superintendent Linney wasn't satisfied.
It was too much of a coincidence that we had the modus operandi of a man who was sadistic when he dealt with Deirdre Sainsbury, and the same man, in my opinion, committed the murder of Claire Wolterton. I had to sit back and just wait and wait, because I felt this. He might talk later on. This happens. They sometimes do, if there's something on their mind.
Unaware of Kenneth Linney's theory, as the years went by, Claire's family tried to cope with the huge void that had been left in their lives.
I think about it all the time. Always remember birthdays. Christmases is very difficult because she was Christmas. Holidays were difficult. In fact, you spend a lot of time thinking that you shouldn't be doing holidays, Christmas and things like that, because it didn't feel right without her being there.
For me, Claire was Claire. I can't explain to you how that is. Claire was just a happy-go-lucky Claire.
Most memories I have are quite normal memories, because having a meal was just never having a meal. It was always laughing, having a meal at something that she'd either done or was doing while you were having the meal. So mostly, when we sit down for dinner, I often remember some of the silly things she did. You know, she would either have peas up her nose or ice cream all over her face, or she would fill her mouth up with food and then laugh with her mouth open. It sounds awful, but when you're having a meal, it's actually quite funny.
Well, with my brother, it really affected him badly. He had a nervous breakdown and everything. So in the end, I didn't just lose a sister, I lost half of a brother as well, because he just weren't the same ever since.
In 1996, 15 years after his conviction for murdering Deirdre Sainsbury, Colin Campbell appealed.
He stated that whilst he was guilty of causing her death, it wasn't murder.
At the appeal, he put forward the same defence as his original trial, but this time with the backing of an expert, who stated that due to being on the wrong medication, an epileptic episode could have been to blame. Campbell's conviction was quashed, and in 1999, a retrial ordered.
At that retrial, Campbell proffered a plea to manslaughter, which was accepted by the Crown, and he was therefore convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment again, but with a minimum tariff of 1 day.
The presiding judge, Mr. Justice Gage, said that whilst the court accepted that at the time of the killing Campbell's responsibility had been diminished, he still constituted a danger to the public, so couldn't be released without going through a parole hearing. It wasn't the result he'd hoped for.
And at subsequent hearings before the parole board, it was deemed that he was too dangerous to be released.
As the years went by, Campbell remained in prison, but the unsolved murder of Claire Wolterton was never forgotten.
We didn't close the case completely, of course. You never do. We carried on taking inquiries and questions and answers from people, for other forces ringing up. This often happens, and you compare notes.
Police remained determined that they would bring Claire's murderer to justice. By 2011, the depraved murderer of Claire Wolterton still hadn't been found, although police did have their suspicions about Colin Campbell, who was in prison for the strikingly similar 1984 killing of Deirdre Sainsbury. In 2007, Thames Valley Police had started looking at cold cases headed up by Pete Byrne. Claire's case was about to turn a corner.
In 2011, we had the capacity to commence a reinvestigation and a review into Claire's case. What we were looking to do was to use advancements in forensic science in the intervening 30 years to see if we could potentially identify the person responsible for her death.
What the review team found was to be key in moving the case forward.
One of the items that we submitted for additional forensic work was the tapings. These tapings had been originally taken to potentially obtain fibres. However, we knew from other cases that had been investigated by other forces within the UK that now you could get DNA that had been captured from those tapings.
The evidence was sent to LGC Forensics near Oxford for DNA analysis.
Tapes were examined microscopically and small sections were cut out and submitted for DNA profiling.
Pete Byrne contacted Kenneth Linney, who had retired, to tell him a cold case review was taking place.
Which I was delighted about, because I thought something might happen or come from that.
It didn't take long for the lab to come back with a result.
A mixed DNA profile was obtained which appeared to be from Claire Waterton and from an unknown male. We used that profile of the unknown male to search the National DNA Database, and this identified a list of potential contributors. Colin Campbell was amongst those individuals.
It was a name that was well known to everyone involved in the original 1981 case.
The moment I saw his name, I knew that he was a convicted killer. So I was obviously really, really excited.
The match to Campbell was strong, but it wasn't strong enough to guarantee a conviction.
At that point, they were able to say it was a 1 in a million match probability. Whilst that's good, normally for DNA, it's a 1 in a billion match probability.
A 1 in a million match probability meant that there could be up to 60 other individuals in the country who the DNA could belong to. 1 in a billion would mean it almost certainly came from Campbell.
So we needed additional forensic work to take place, which involved using a professor of genetic statistics from UCL College in London. That was going to take time, and also we were doing additional tests on other tapings that had been recovered from Claire's body.
In 2011, having been in prison for 26 years, Campbell was coming to the end of his sentence for what was now the manslaughter of Deirdre Sainsbury.
Campbell was a Category D prisoner, which meant he was allowed access out into the open, and obviously it was a potential danger to members of the public, the fact that this man potentially now was a double killer. So we had to make contact with the prison service, get him recategorised so that he was sent back to a closed prison.
Finally, after months of waiting, there was news from UCL College in London.
We had work completed by this professor of genetics who was able to say that the match probability, in his opinion, was 1 in a billion of Colin Campbell being the donor of the DNA found on the tapings.
The news meant that Kenneth Linney's original hunch in 1984 about Campbell had been right.
When I found out that Colin Campbell had been identified through DNA as being identical to a person's hair, his hair, which had been found on the tape taken at our mortuary, I was delighted.
On November the 27th, 2012, 31 years after Claire was killed, Colin Campbell was arrested. Police decided to question him.
Campbell showed no remorse whatsoever, and I got the impression that he felt that he was a victim, in as much that he had epilepsy, it had been wrongly diagnosed, he'd been given the wrong medication years ago, and it's other people's fault.
My lifestyle
meant that the way I was, I wasn't averse to being friendly with the lady.
Yeah.
I may well have known a series of ladies.
Okay.
Claire may have been one of them. No, I don't. She looks like any girl I may have played hockey with. She looks like any girl I may have met through work.
Okay.
Actually, she looks like a happy person, and I'm glad about that. No, I don't recognise her.
Okay, thank you very much.
That's not to say I never ever knew her. I just don't remember her.
To my mind, had you committed that horrendous act against Claire, you would have known what you'd done, and you'd remember it. But he was almost blasé about the fact, well, I can't remember what I was doing. We consulted with the Crown Prosecution Service. They agreed that Campbell should be charged. He was charged.
Once Campbell was charged, it was time to inform Claire's family.
Somebody described it as like a fresh scab that had been picked off. It was like an old wound that had been reopened, and that described it quite well for me.
On the 15th of November 2013, Colin Frederick Campbell stood trial at Reading Crown Court for the 1981 murder of Claire Walterton. Claire's mum, Carol, was there from the start.
It was very, very, very hard and very emotional and very upsetting.
Colin Campbell entered a plea of not guilty.
Campbell couldn't run the defence that the epilepsy was the cause of his actions which resulted in Claire's death. That was because the experts had given evidence for him in relation to Deirdre's death weren't happy to say that epilepsy could be responsible for two homicides.
Claire's mum, Carol, had her own way of dealing with the grisly details of the case.
I didn't stay in for all the nasty bits at all. But what I was in there for was quite difficult.
Claire's family had tremendous courage. Claire's mum wanted to come to court. She wanted to make sure that the man responsible for her daughter's death was convicted. But at the same time, and rightly so, she didn't want to know the full details of what happened to her daughter.
The prosecution called on their trump card, the DNA.
The key item was the DNA evidence. That's what brought the case to court in the first place. And when a DNA expert tells a jury this DNA is 1 billion times more likely to belong to Colin Campbell than anyone else, I think that was the key bit of information.
Faced with such compelling DNA evidence, Campbell put up his own defence.
He couldn't recall ever going into the amusement arcade where Claire had been that evening, but said he may have gone in there, and had he gone in there, he may well have spoken to her, and he may well have touched her, and that's how his DNA got on her body. What was interesting was that the taping that from where the DNA was obtained was marked as being taken from Claire's buttocks, so therefore the fact that he was potentially saying was innocent contact made that extremely unlikely.
The defence were, if I recall, trying to sort of blur the lines a little bit and discredit the DNA, but I think when you say it's 1 billion times, that's pretty damning.
At the beginning of December 2013, the judge sent the jury out to deliberate.
The jury took quite a long time for it to come out, to make up their mind, which was just a nightmare again. You don't realise how much that is chewing you up inside and how much tensed you are. And that.
After 3 excruciating days, the jury came back, and Campbell was convicted of murder. A few days later, the sentence followed. The judge, Mr. Justice Spencer, stated that only Campbell would know the true circumstances in which he came to pick up Claire Walterton that Thursday night in 1981, but that he was certain he did it with the intention of sexually assaulting, mutilating, and ultimately killing her.
Colin Campbell was sentenced to life imprisonment for the murder of Claire Walterton. He must serve a minimum of 24 years. By that time, he'll be 90 years of age.
For Claire's family, it was a bittersweet moment.
I started to get fed up with people going, oh, now you'll have closure. Because you don't have closure. She's still gone. She still went through something that was horrible. I mean, I really do say I am really pleased that they got him, but having it all raked up again was really difficult.
What he got and everything else weren't even long enough, as far as I'm concerned.
He took a beautiful life away. A beautiful life. Somebody who was just coming into being a girl, a woman. And that's just not fair. It's not fair.
Kenneth Linney, who had been involved from the very beginning, was there to hear it all.
The judge, of course, made it quite clear to him when he sentenced him that he wasn't going to get away with the epilepsy excuse that he gave before. They couldn't produce any witnesses to say that it was epilepsy. And the judge made a comment that if the Court of Appeal had known his background, he mightn't have had his sentence squashed. And it was nice to know that he was convicted and rightly sentenced to a long term. He will never be released from prison.
Although former Detective Superintendent Linney wasn't the only officer with a vested interest in the outcome.
Since 1981, Claire's case has been at the forefront of everyone's mind that worked on that case. When I got my current job, when I met old detectives that worked on Claire's case, they always asked me, what's happening with Claire's case? They were all extremely pleased when we got the result and Campbell was convicted. So much so that they held a reunion 6 months after the trial where they just wanted to meet up, talk about the case and just say well done, because it was all part of their life.
After 32 years of trying to solve this brutal and bewildering case, Kenneth Linney could be satisfied they'd got the right man.
How many more people would he have killed had he got away with the Denham case? Because if you get someone who starts that activity of killing young girls and causing horrific injuries on them, when do they stop? That's the question. And I believe that we did stop the makings of a serial killer.
Campbell was in his late 60s at the time of his conviction for Claire's brutal murder, which means it was unlikely he'd ever be released. Finally, Claire and Deirdre's families could...
He looks over at her and says, "You need a facelift."
The doctor went outside of his normal routine in prescribing all of the medications.
She has eye patches on, so she can't even see what anyone's doing and has to really rely on trust.
Her daughter couldn't get her to wake up. She was clearly over-medicated.
Sir, this is 911. Can I help you?
She whispers, "If anything happens to me, make sure it's not Dad."
Can I help you? Sir, what's wrong?
I'm falling in the bathtub.
Who's in the bathtub?
My wife.
Okay, is she conscious?
She's not. She's not on a position.
Okay, sir. Sir, I need you to calm. Sir, I can't understand you, okay? Can you calm down just a little bit? Okay, your wife is unconscious?
She is unconscious. She's underwater.
Okay, did you get her out of the water?
I can't. I just let the water out.
Okay, is she breathing at all?
She is not.
Okay, sir, the ambulance has been paged. They're on their way, okay? Do not hang up. What? Sir?
Martin called 911 to let them know that his wife was in the tub and that she wasn't breathing. My name is Chad Grunander, and I am the Chief Deputy at the Utah County Attorney's Office.
I need help.
Okay, sir, they're on their way. Is your wife breathing?
She is not. I am a physician. I got CPR in progress.
You're doing CPR. How old is your wife?
My wife is 50 years old. She just had surgery here a couple of days or a week ago.
What kind of surgery did she have?
She had a facelift.
She had a facelift?
Yes.
Okay, do you know how to do CPR?
I'm doing it.
Okay, do not hang...
Eventually, emergency personnel arrive at the home. They find Michelle lying down in the bathroom.
They're working on her. Martin is angry. He is screaming at Michelle, who is unresponsive. Why did you do this? Why did you have this surgery? I told you not to do it. I'm Dr. Joni Johnston, a clinical and forensic psychologist and private investigator.
Once they start performing CPR, the chest compressions cause her to expel numerous cups of water. Her body begins to pink up. They put Michelle into the ambulance and rush her off to the hospital. At one point, Martin, who was very agitated and who was screaming in the ER, actually made a very bizarre request, asking for the doctor to continue. I will give you $1,000 if you'll continue to perform life-saving efforts. And it struck this physician as very odd, because Michelle was obviously deceased and she couldn't be brought back. And Martin, being a doctor, would have known that.
Michelle grew up in a Mormon family. She was kind of a golden girl, inside and out. She's smart. She played the violin. She was homecoming queen. I mean, she was somebody that you'd look in the yearbook and go, I wanted to be that person.
She had an outgoing personality. She was respected by her neighbors and loved by her friends.
Michelle met Mark McNeil at a church event. He is this, outwardly appearing, charismatic guy, very confident, handsome. The fireworks were flying very, very quickly in this relationship. And so, in spite of her family kind of wanting them to wait, very quickly after they met, they eloped and started their family. They end up having 4 biological children in the space of 5 years. They have 3 girls and a boy. And then as they begin to get a little bit older, they end up adopting some children from Ukraine.
Michelle was a dedicated mother. She was so committed to these children. She wanted to make sure that they grew up having everything they could possibly want. I'm Dr. Brianna Fox. I'm a professor in the Department of Criminology at the University of South Florida. They had this very devout, church-going type of atmosphere, and that everything revolved around being good people, supporting each other, the community, and really living in this very family-oriented lifestyle.
All of her children seemed to absolutely adore her. and really look up to her, see her as a role model, as both, a woman and as a mom. And we're very close to her.
Martin had been appointed by the governor of the state of Utah as the director of a state hospital. He also was legally trained, but he never did take or pass the bar, so he never did practice as an attorney. From the outside, it looked like a perfect marriage. They were a very attractive couple. They seemed to get along very well. He was not a faithful husband, but others in the community didn't see that. So there was a secret side to Martin McNeil.
It was very upsetting to Michelle. She would always suspect and sometimes find things. And yet when she confronted Martin, he would always just deny. He starts working out all the time. He starts going to the tanning salons. He is increasingly distant from Michelle. He's disparaging of her. He doesn't seem to show any affection toward her at all. Not only does she suspect that Martin is having an affair, I'm wondering how much she felt threatened by this relationship because he was acting so differently toward her.
She found an unknown phone number on his cell phone, and she actually spoke with her daughter Alexis about this, and they did an online search with respect to this phone number, and the number came back to a woman named Gypsy Jillian Willis.
She confronts Martin with this evidence, and once again, he just essentially says, "That's ridiculous. I'm not having an affair." Martin and Michelle are sitting at the breakfast table, and he looks over at her and says, "You need a facelift."
This is not something that Michelle wanted or needed. She was beautiful, usually quite confident despite her husband's behavior, and it didn't seem like she was very concerned about her looks. She was more concerned about being a great mother.
When she just looks crestfallen and stunned, he tries to soften it by saying, "Oh, well, no, it's a gift. I want to gift you a facelift."
Martin says afterwards he was going to take her on a 2-week cruise while she recovers.
I think this really does upset Michelle. And also, I think it stirs up a lot of insecurity in her. She's thinking, oh my gosh, Martin has been working out all the time. He's going to the tanning salon. I'm not at my best, so maybe a facelift would, put a new spark back into our marriage.
Martin persisted and was pushing her on to have this surgery, and ultimately she relented and went along with it. Martin and Michelle went to the plastic surgeon to talk about the procedures, and also with them during that meeting was Alexis, Martin and Michelle's daughter. Alexis, a first-year medical student at the time, and Martin was very overbearing.
McNeil does 99% of the talking. He tells the doctor, "We want an entire facelift, her eyes, upper and lower, the upper forehead, everything."
He is now telling the doctor exactly what medications that he wants to be prescribed, exactly the dosage and things that No other person would typically get to dictate to a doctor.
The doctor went outside of his normal routine in prescribing all of the medications that Martin was talking about. Those medications included Percocet and Valium, Phenergan, as well as Ambien, which is a sleep aid. And all of these drugs were central nervous system depressants that, if used in combination, would have this additive effect, which is very powerful, which could result in someone stopping to breathe or slipping potentially into a coma. And the doctor made it very clear that they were as needed. They weren't to be taken all together at once. But the doctor prescribed this set of medication because Martin, a fellow doctor, was going to be caring for Michelle.
Michelle has a history of high blood pressure. And so one of the things that the doctor recommends as part of the physical is that she wait and postpone the procedure until she gets her blood pressure under control. Michelle is really on board with that. You know, she doesn't want to undergo any kind of risky procedure.
But Martin had other ideas. He said, absolutely not. This has to happen exactly when he planned for it to occur. It was almost like he was putting the schedule that he had in his mind over Michelle's health.
Apparently there's some kind of time limit on this offer of this gift. And so he kind of bulldozes her forward into getting this facelift. You know, when she first comes out of surgery, I think she's very groggy. She's got kind of pads over her eyes. She's pretty vulnerable.
Martin was actually quite upset that she needed to stay a night in the hospital. He wanted her to come home immediately. And she was effectively blind. She needed someone with her to really care for her, to give her the post-op medications, to help her eat, to help her bathe, because she needed to recover. Alexis woke up early the next morning and went to her mother's bedside and found her mother very lethargic. Michelle went on to tell Alexis that your dad just kept giving me medications to the point where I ultimately threw up.
Alexis confronts her dad and says, I gave her medication and she threw up and I wasn't sure it got in her system and I just want to make sure she was comfortable. Just basically kind of makes excuses. Maybe I over-medicated her. This really alarmed Alexis to just see how drugged she was.
Alexis says she wants to take care of all of the medications for her mother moving forward, and her father reluctantly agrees. She can't even see what anyone's doing and has to really rely on trust.
Michelle seems kind of scared to Alexis. At one point, Michelle says, I want you to put each pill in my hand so I can feel what it feels like and I can recognize what that pill is.
She was worried that Martin was up to something. Michelle told Alexis, she said, if something happens to me, make sure it's not your father. Michelle was down to about 1 to 1.5 Percocets a day is all. She wasn't taking the Valium any longer. She wasn't taking the Ambien to help her sleep. She was weaning off the medications. Michelle was very upbeat. She was doing well. By that time, her bandages on her eyes were taken off. She could walk. She was even beginning to drive. And they talked about Michelle's plans for the day. She was going to take her kids to ballet in the afternoon. It was going to be, for all intents and purposes, a normal day in the life of Michelle and her family.
That day, Martin actually had an awards ceremony to attend. He made sure to go to the photographer and ask on a number of occasions, make sure that I am in the photos.
And he was very insistent that the photo be taken at a particular time to show that he was there. The McNeil's youngest daughter, her name was Ada. She was in kindergarten at the time. And Michelle, her plans that day were to pick up Ada from school. Rather than Michelle going to pick up Ada, Martin picked her up about 11:30 or so in the morning and brought Ada home. Martin encouraged Ada to go find her mother while Martin went into the kitchen. And she really couldn't find her mom at first until she found her in the bathtub in the master bedroom with her face up. The tub was full with water, but Michelle would not respond.
She goes out and she calls her dad. Her dad comes in and screams for her to go next door and get some help.
Can I help you?
Martin described to the operator that he suspected his wife had fallen into the tub. She wasn't breathing. Her head was under the water, that he couldn't get her out of the tub. His description of Michelle differed from what Ada saw and from what others saw. Because when they entered the bathroom, her head was not under the water. It did not appear like she had fallen face forward into the tub. By that time, Martin had unplugged the tub and the water had drained, but Michelle was still inside the tub.
He and a male neighbor lift Michelle out of the tub. They put her on the ground, and they're both doing CPR.
Martin was a doctor. Martin was very well trained and had performed CPR a number of times at the care facility where he worked.
The paramedics get there. They end up taking Michelle, who is unresponsive, to the hospital. And in spite of attempts to revive her, they fail.
It looked like it was probably a natural death, perhaps a complication due to her recent surgery. Maybe she had passed out in the tub. But there was something that just didn't add up, and the treating physician at the ER decided to call in the medical examiner's office because he felt like there was something that was askew.
This was so shocking to Alexis because she had just called and talked to her mom that morning. So when this happened, combined with some past events that Alexis had experienced, it really raised the hairs on the back of her neck, wondering if her father had been involved.
Alexis has this overwhelming feeling that her father has something to do with her mother's death. McNeil actually described to the doctor performing the autopsy how Michelle was found in the tub. And he went on to explain that she was found head down, slumped over into the tub as if she had fallen and drowned. Myocarditis is a condition of the heart which causes the heart to swell. But she did describe the diagnosis of myocarditis to be quite slight, and she then attributed the manner of death to natural causes, not a homicide, not a suicide, not an accidental death, but natural causes. It was a tragedy the day Michelle died. She left a hole in so many people's hearts.
About a week after Michelle's death, he asked his oldest daughter, Rachel, to meet him at the temple to pray that they will find the right nanny. Rachel thinks this is a little bit odd, but she agrees and she meets her dad.
And when they were at the temple, a woman walked up to them and they engaged in some small talk. And Martin asked for this woman's name, and her name was Gypsy Jillian Willis.
Martin, acts kind of surprised to see her, tells Rachel that he used to work with this young woman, and at this point, he excuses himself to go to the bathroom. And Gypsy is trying to kind of ingratiate herself with Rachel. Rachel, of course, is consumed with grief at this point. She's not interested in engaging with anybody. Martin says he's going to put out flyers, and the whole family is going to be involved in interviewing for this nanny. Interestingly enough, the only person who shows up for this interview is this same woman who showed up outside the temple. He announces to the kids that he has hired Jillian to be the new nanny. It's pretty apparent pretty quickly after Gypsy moves in that she is not only not qualified to be a nanny, she's not interested in being a nanny.
She made one meal, and after that refuses to help the children, watch the children, engage with them, cook for them, clean for them. She basically just hangs around the house.
When Alexis learned that the nanny her dad hired was named Gypsy Jillian Willis, she immediately knew that name, and she knew that that was the woman that her mother had suspected Martin of having an affair with. And so she confronted her father and said, "Dad, you are not to bring Gypsy Jillian Willis into our home."
Instead of reacting and getting rid of Gypsy, her father kicks Alexis, another one of her sisters, out of the home just for raising their very legitimate concerns.
They went up to Idaho, which is where Gypsy was from, and she introduced him to her family. And within weeks of Michelle's death, Martin made a big public display in the presence of her family at a local restaurant where on bended knee, he asked Gypsy to marry him.
Gypsy has not paid her taxes for the past 7 years. And Martin is concerned that if they marry, he's going to be assuming this debt. He comes up with a plan to send one of his adopted daughters, Giselle, back to Ukraine, allegedly for the summer, to visit some of her biological relatives with the understanding that somebody's going to go pick her up at the end of the summer. And so Alexis escorts Giselle to Ukraine. Martin asked Alexa to bring Giselle's passport back. His reasoning for this is she might lose it. He changes the birth date by 20 years. Jillian now becomes Jillian Giselle McNeil, as opposed to Gypsy Jillian Willis. And that is their big plan, to essentially leave Giselle in Ukraine for Gypsy to assume Giselle's identity, which would, of course, kill a number of birds with one stone. It would allow him to rid himself of one of his adopted daughters. It would allow Jillian to start with a clean slate, and it would allow the two of them to get married.
Martin's daughters believed that there was something very suspicious that had gone on with respect to their mother's death. They believed that Martin was involved in some fashion, but they weren't sure how. For some time, local law enforcement authorities didn't take the case very seriously. They weren't approaching the case as if it were a homicide, because the medical examiner first ruled that she had died of natural causes.
She goes and she gets her, and she brings her back. This is basically a federal offense. And so Martin and Gypsy are charged with this, and they're both convicted.
Both Gypsy and Martin were sentenced to federal prison. I started working on the case against Martin McNeil in about 2010. Investigators in our office decided to take a look into the circumstances surrounding Michelle's death and started to connect a few dots.
This is somebody who has been lying and deceiving people for much of his adult life. Martin McNeil's path to becoming a doctor certainly wasn't straightforward. He initially, out of high school, enrolled in the military. He lied about his age to get into the military. He was there for a couple of years, and then he was discharged after he was diagnosed with latent schizophrenia.
He was able to receive disability and benefits despite the fact that he was then employed and receiving ample compensation as a medical doctor.
Martin decided that he was going to apply for a military ID card for Gypsy. And in the application, they alleged that they were married. And the marriage date that Martin McNeil put down was the date of Michelle's funeral. And someone with that sort of mindset, that arrogance and narcissism, who is a doctor and who is charged with caring for others, that kind of a person is very dangerous.
They find out that Martin has a fraud conviction, that at one point he had stolen checks, and he had spent $35,000, and it was incarcerated for several months. When they look at his career, they find out that he lied about his grades to get into medical school. They find out that he had been accused of Medicare fraud. It's like a snowball.
It seemed to them that the medical examiner's office hadn't thoroughly looked at the toxicology reports. The drugs that were found in Michelle's system were very alarming. Alexis had spoken with her mother that morning. She had plans for the day. So for her to have all those drugs in her system, especially the Ambien, raised some serious concerns about how or why she took those drugs. There were periods of time that morning when Martin was unaccounted for at work, and he could have easily traveled home and administered those drugs or persuaded Michelle to take them, put them in her food or perhaps in a drink, and then return to work before picking up Ada. He amended the cause of death to a combination of myocarditis and drug toxicity, and he moved the manner of death from natural causes to undetermined. And that was a big step in the investigation. We ultimately found another medical examiner in the state of Florida. He had worked on a number of high-profile cases. His name was Dr. Joshua Perper. Dr. Perper came back with the opinion that Michelle had not died from myocarditis. She had clearly died from drowning, and that the drugs in her system had facilitated the drowning. It was a big breakthrough in the case. We learned that Martin had had an affair with another woman. Martin had told this woman that he knew how to kill someone in plain sight and make it look like it was a natural death. He could administer something to that individual and it would look like a heart attack. She came forward and she told us about what Martin had said.
When he was doing CPR, people said they never saw him administering the life-saving breaths that were necessary, never saw Michelle's chest rising, things that really made them think that he was essentially trying to withhold any type of life-saving care from her.
One of the things the neighbor says later is that Michelle has a lot of mucus on her face, and yet at no point in time does Martin have any mucus on his face. So that seems a little bit odd or suspicious to him.
Okay, they're on their way. Is your wife breathing?
She is not. I am a physician. I got CPR in progress.
For reasons not entirely known, he gave an inaccurate address, which delayed the response of EMTs and emergency personnel from arriving at the house.
Do not hang up. What? Sir?
I'm quite certain that Martin was probably surprised to some degree because I think he thought in his mind he had gotten away with murdering his wife. Given his personality, he was very arrogant, quite narcissistic, I think that he thought that he had probably covered his steps enough. By the time we brought charges against Martin McNeil and went to trial, it was about 6.5 years after Michelle's death. In the state of Utah, the legislature had recently changed the law to allow cameras in the courtroom, and it was the first live televised jury trial in the state of Utah. We knew it was a tough case. We didn't know how the jury would react to the evidence, and so we had our concerns about whether or not we would be successful. The biggest challenge we faced in this trial was proving that Michelle McNeil actually died by way of homicide, that someone was responsible for her death, that it wasn't naturally caused or it wasn't due to an accident. We had to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that she died at the hands of another. And then on top of that, that it was Martin McNeil that killed her. They really tried to focus the jury's attention on the initial findings that Michelle had died from hypertension and myocarditis. So we had to disprove that that had happened. They also tried to present an alibi defense, that Martin's whereabouts could be proven that morning and that he wasn't with his wife, but it fell very flat and it didn't prove anything.
His own daughters were the star in terms of the prosecution.
The message from her father to Michelle was, I'm coming home, I'll fix you a lunch, I'll help take care of you, stay home, stay put, everything's going to be fine. And that was a bizarre message. Because Michelle was doing fine at that point. There was no reason for Martin to be concerned. And it also let the jury know that Martin had plans to go home that morning.
One thing that really struck me about this case is the fact that Martin McNeil's own daughters were so dedicated and motivated.
She testified about how well her mom was doing after the surgery, how she was down to 1.5 Percocets per day, how she wasn't taking the Valium, she wasn't taking the Ambien any longer, that she was recovering well. Another daughter that talked about her interactions with Michelle on the morning of her death. She seemed upbeat, she had plans for the day, and of course you put that together with her being found dead just a few short hours later with all those drugs in her system. It was clear that something suspicious had happened. Rachel testified about Martin's explanation to her about how Michelle was found in the tub, which differed from the eyewitness testimony.
Another witness was his son's girlfriend, Elaine. She testified to the fact that she had been over at the McNeil house right after Michelle had died, and how dramatic, as she described it, Martin was. He wanted all the medication out of the house. And he essentially asked her to flush it down the toilet. And at that point, she had no reason to be suspicious, and so she gathered up all this medication and she flushed it down the toilet.
Several jailhouse snitches, as they're known, came forward and said that Martin had actually said to them that if he had killed his wife, he would have gotten away with it, that he wanted her out of his life, calling her derogatory names, saying things that essentially implicated himself in her murder while he was in jail for fraud.
there was just an overwhelming feeling of relief that we had proven our case, that the family would have some measure of justice, that they would have some measure of closure.
In 2017, Martin McNeil ending his life in prison. And so, for all the things that he had done, he only served a relatively short amount of time in prison before ending his life.
I think he viewed a life in prison as no life at all. I think that's probably what it came down to and why he chose to commit suicide.
I wonder about the timing. Oftentimes there's a series of appeals that happen after somebody is convicted. And it isn't uncommon when somebody is feeling suicidal or deciding that they're going to take control of their life in prison, and they're going to be the one to decide when they check out. It isn't uncommon for that to happen when their last appeal has been denied.
Why he simply didn't divorce Michelle is a question I still ask myself, but I think he didn't want to divorce her because of potential alimony. He also may have lost some of his reputation in the community if he divorced his wife to be with this other woman. And given his background, given his knowledge, he felt like he could get away with murder. It was an almost perfect murder, but at the end of the day, he was caught. He left too many clues behind